Hey, this is Nicholas with the Backyard TARDIS here with another podcast spotlight, this time talking about Segabits and the Sega Talk podcast. For those who don't know me, maybe this is the first video you clicked on, I am a big fan of podcasts. Currently, I'm listening to over 56 podcasts actively, but I've listened to well over 100 podcasts, some that have discontinued, others that didn't fully hold my interest, but as someone who really likes podcasts, I thought I would just kind of share some of my thoughts about some of my favorite podcasts. And in the month of September, I decided to focus on some of the more Sega ones, as I was feeling very nostalgic about the anniversary of the Dreamcast, 9/9/1999. And so we did one on the Dreamcast Junkyard, and now we're talking Segabits Sega Talk podcast with George and Barry. And they also have the Swing Report podcast, but we're going to focus on the Sega Talk one today. Maybe do that one next year. But this is just, if you're a Sega fan, this is a podcast you need to be listening to. Sega Talk had such a deeper level to your fandom love of games. Because they don't just talk about, oh yeah, that game was cool, love that game, we love this about that game. No, they go into production development, what was going on around the time the game was released, so what were inspirations for the game, notes from the developer, interviews, different things, all that stuff they go into about the production and making of, and the reception, and really giving you a little bit of a time capsule there with like the reception and kind of the things that were going on at the time. But then also, looking back now, what place does this hold in Sega Legacy? And they've done so many great ones. And just to start out, they did Outrun 1986. It's arcade and consoles, and then they go right around and they did Sonic 2006. That train wreck documented that. That was really good. But they've just done so many. Just listing some off here that I have down: Panzer Dragoon, Nights into Dreams, Phantasy Star Online, Streets of Rage, Streets of Rage 2, going on there. Jet Set Radio, the original Sonic 1 and Sonic 2 on the Genesis, Golden Axe, Shenmue, Burning Rangers, the Sonic Adventure games, Comic Zone, Super Monkey Ball, Rez. Now there's a game I didn't know much about. It's now one of my favorite Dreamcast games. I didn't even know it existed before they talked about it. But then they also do stuff like they covered consoles, like they talked about the Dreamcast itself. They've talked about a lot of different arcades. The Die Hard arcade was a good one. They've talked about movies. They did the recent Sonic movie, the Sonic OVA. They even branch out. They do stuff like F-Zero GX. So that's the arcade that Sega made for Nintendo. Recently covered Sonic Colors, something that's a hot topic right now. They covered the Candy arcade cabinets. So this one was a fascinating one for me because it's not as big here in the West, but just going these arcade cabinets that were across the board for different games. And so it was interesting getting to learn the history of that. They do new stuff like Yakuza 0. They do a better job than me, but Kenji Inoue retrospective. So this is a developer that I think like Haiju Konomi and some of these different ones that are holding a lot of respect as being very Japanese artistic. I think he would have definitely been one of the ones, but we lost him too soon. But going back and looking at some of his like D and stuff like that, his games, they covered the Archie Sonic comics. So they're doing everything Sega. They recently did one that was Xbox and Sega, about just the original Xbox and how a lot of the Sega games went over there, and also some of the conversations, board meetings that they had between Sega and Xbox, and things that could have been. Kind of talking about that. They just did Marvel vs. Capcom 2. So that's, not even a Sega made game, but just a game that was on the Dreamcast going into that. Really good one. Yuji Naka's Let's Tap, and they really kind of talked about Yuji Naka's time after he left Sega. That was also a real fascinating one. Maybe games that I didn't give the time of day, but it's interesting to see where this creator's gone after his career at Sega. And then I know a lot of my listeners are big Star Wars fans, big Star Wars podcast fans. And George and Barry are both Star Wars fans, but Barry definitely is a big Star Wars fan. So they did the Sega Star Wars arcade. They did the Star Wars arcade, the Star Wars Trilogy arcade, and the Sega Pod Racing arcade machine, all in one big extravaganza podcast. So if you're big into Star Wars podcasts, go to the Segabits Sega Talk podcast and find that Star Wars arcade episode. It's recent. It was only like a month ago or two, and give that one a listen, because you're going to see these guys. They're nerding out about like the Sega directors that were involved, the sound designer, all that kind of stuff, giving you a different kind of layer to what your typical Star Wars podcast might give, talking about these machines. And that's one of the things that I love. If you're somebody who's kind of on the outside, maybe you had a Sega, as they say, a Genesis or a Dreamcast or a Saturn, something back in the day, and so you have some nostalgia for Sega, but you're not really in that community. These are the guys to listen to, because they're not like overly technical. They're not talking as if their audience already knows everything, but they are nerding out about people. They're knowledgeable of who the names of developers are, and they really give that express, and kind of just like in like Star Wars fandom, if John Williams made something, like you're talking about any other movie, if John Williams did the music, you bring that up. Well, they know the composers of Sega music, so they're talking about that, and they can add that depth of like, this guy is just brilliant. He's done this and this and this, and when they're not, like, they can say, wow, this is like, what does this guy do? Because he did this one thing, and then he pops up like 5 years later and works on this other game. What's this guy's day job? And so they have fun, great discussions. And I think if you're somebody on the outside, not really in that Sega community, this is a great way to become educated, kind of get to see what Sega's all about, especially if you think Sega's just Sonic. Or, Sonic and maybe some sports games or some weird Japanese RPG games. You don't really know what Sega has to offer, or especially if you were a Nintendo kid growing up and you just didn't like, what was the big thing about the Genesis. It has Sonic, but what else did it really have? Well, it had a lot. And if you follow this Sonic Talk and listen to this podcast, you're going to find out that, my tongue. Sega Talk. Sonic Talk is a different podcast. But if you follow Sega Talk by Segabits, you're going to find out that there's a ton of great games to dive into. And many of them, if you're on a modern console hardware, a lot of these are available. So especially on Xbox. Xbox with their backwards compatibility, you can get a lot of these. You can get a lot of them on the PS3, not as many on the PS4, and of course a lot of them were on the Wii Virtual Console and stuff like that. The PS4, PS5 is a little harder, but definitely on the Xbox systems can you get a lot of these games. One of the things that I think, to me, I just truly appreciate how much work they put into it, because they don't just sit down. They're not like me. They don't just sit down, scribble a few notes on a piece of paper and then give this. They actually do research, a lot of research. So it's one of those things where if you want to have a well-informed podcast that's going to teach you a little bit about these things, go with Segabits. And of course, they have a lot of fun. They joke. George likes to stir the pot. He kind of enjoys the drama that you see on Twitter. He likes to give occasionally a controversial take, even though he's not very controversial. But it's just funny. And of course, as always, they're a big asset to the Sega community. Their website, the Segabits website, one of the largest Sega fan sites out there, if not the largest. And really, a lot of that is due to how much work and effort they put in to it, and they put that same effort into their podcasts. So check that out, and I'll go to the next one I'm going to do. Going to be on Megavisions. So with that, have a good day. Check out Segabits Sega Talk podcast. I'll catch you in the next video.